Hey VC, this is Harvey and welcome back to Spinning the Black Circle. This is my Jazz Vinyl Tag 2022 video upload. This is a fantastic idea. 22 questions put to me by the VC community, and obviously I need to respond with 22 albums from the jazz genre. And I have thoroughly enjoyed making this selection. And of course, I had no choice but to re-listen to many of these albums before I pulled this together. So I hope you enjoy this video upload as much as I enjoyed compiling it. So without further ado, what is the first question put to me by the VC community? So what was my jazz find of 2021? I suppose one of the joys of visiting record stores and crate digging is that you might just find something you weren't expecting and have never heard before. And let's be honest, occasionally buy on a whim based on the cover. And I definitely did that with this jazz LP. I hadn't heard of this chap before, but it's by Bunky Green, and it's called Places We've Never Been. It's a 1979 jazz LP on the Vanguard label. So Bunky Green was a Milwaukee-born jazz saxophonist, alto saxophonist. This was recorded in New York in the 70s. Randy Brecker on trumpet. Very New York sounding LP. Funky, melodic, but also quite stretching in places too. It's not easy listening. It kind of sounds like the cover looks. As good as that. So it's a really great purchase. Hadn't heard of him before. I definitely need to, I think, investigate more of Bunky Green stuff. But just a really great 70s sounding and very East Coast New York sounding jazz LP too. Busy but also melodic, and as I say, a kind of funk undertones without disappearing too far down that route. So tremendous and definitely an unexpected purchase for me that I'm really glad I picked up is Places We've Never Been by Bunky Green from 1979 on the Vanguard label. So that's selection number one. What have the VC asked me next? What was my reissue of 2021? How hard is that? Think about all of the acoustic sounds, all of the tone poets, all of the blue notes released during 2021. That is incredibly difficult. But I've managed to whittle it down after much deliberation to actually a record store day release from last year by the great Kenny Dorham and the LP Quiet Kenny. So this is a 1959 mono edition of this album, re-released last year, remastered by Kevin Gray. What isn't these days? And pressed it coherent, I believe, or manufactured a coherent. This is just a tremendous reissue. Super silent vinyl. The music is absolutely tremendous. I think Kenny Dorham is underrated. You know, he gets kind of pushed to the back behind, obviously, Miles Davis, but also Freddie Hubbard or a Lee Morgan. Whereas actually he was a pretty prolific tunesmith too. He was in Joe Henderson's band and is responsible for some standards too. He's on page one by Joe Henderson, isn't he? Which was, let me just pull out the Blue Note Classic reissue of that page one LP. This features Kenny Dorham. Kenny Dorham's all over this album, right? Tremendous LP. And Blue Bossa is the standard from this, which is a Kenny Dorham composition. So I really think that Kenny Dorham is an underrated jazz trumpeter. And this, if you can still get your hands on it, maybe quite expensive now. Hopefully you got one at the time. Quiet Kenny by Kenny Dorham, 1959 mono LP, re-released last year via the Craft label, who I think are just fantastic. It's both rock and jazz reissues. I managed to persuade Kevin Gray to do an amazing job of this. So definitely, well, saying definitely, after much deliberation, I would say this is my reissue of 2021. This superb Kenny Dorham LP. New release of 2021. Now, as I said in my last video upload, or was it the one before, UK jazz is just exploding at the minute, and this next artist is a great example of that. She's a British multi-instrumentalist jazz artist named Emma Jean Thackeray, and this is the LP Yellow from 2021. Hype Sicker describes her music as a debut album, which I don't think is true actually, but it draws from 70s jazz fusion, P-Funk, the cosmic innovations of Sun Ra and Alice Coltrane. And that is not hyperbole, because this is just a tremendous mix of all those things. It's got some P-Funk in there, definitely that spiritual jazz that Alice Coltrane was famous for, and there's definitely some of that Sun Ra. Wish I could edit this video. Sun Ra vibe in there as well, but it's also incredibly melodic, and I'll use this word I'm sure more than once today, but really funky too. So she's a really young UK jazz multi-instrumentalist. I think trumpet might be her main instrument, but I could be wrong. But she's responsible for lots of things on this LP, with a backing band too. So US VC members, you can definitely stream this and still buy it. But check out Imagine Thackeray. The LP is yellow, and it's an absolutely tremendous jazz album. Definitely my release of 2021. This LP. So what about a saxophone led jazz album? So lots I could have chose from, but how about this for something a little bit different? A chap who's still alive, actually, in this album by Charles Lloyd, which again was reissued last year, but it's a 1965 live LP named Manhattan Stories. So this is an audiophile release, numbered release 1786 that I got last year, but it's just an amazing live LP. Pete LaRocca on drums, Ron Carter on bass, who's just absolutely tremendous, and then Charles Lloyd on this plays sax and also flute though. But in terms of a jazz lead, I thought I would something different other than say John Coltrane. So my selection is Manhattan Stories by Charles Lloyd, still alive. And there was a Tone Poet that came out, I think, wasn't there, a year or two ago, of a Charles Lloyd LP. He's just got a fantastic tone. This is pretty experimental. I wouldn't say it's free jazz, but a great album nonetheless. So hopefully you can still get hold of this, even though it was numbered. Hopefully it hasn't gone through the roof, but great live LP, Manhattan Stories by Charles Lloyd, which was it's a 1965 live album, but was reissued last year. So that is the saxophone lead. What about trumpet lead then? Again, I didn't want to go for obvious when it came to trumpet leads. So I've gone for this LP actually from two deceased musicians. And this LP was recorded in 2010, but only released 10 years later, when one of them had died and one of them has since died. And I'm talking about this coming together of two legends, really. Tony Allen and Hugh Masekela, and the Rejoice LP that came out about 2 years ago. Just a wonderful, wonderful collaboration. Tony Allen, obviously, big Afrobeat drum innovator. Hugh Masekela, very famous African jazz trumpeter, and this is just such a swinging LP. It definitely lives up to the title Rejoice, because it's if you're in a bit of a funky mood, had a bit of a hard day, and you put this on, this should lift you right out. It's a tremendous LP. But I think they were between touring schedules in 2010, and somebody managed to capture them in the studio for a proper recording. But it took many years for this to be released for some strange reason. It took a number of years for someone to have the idea of actually releasing this LP. But very glad they did, as Rejoice by the great Tony Allen and Hugh Masekela. Obviously, Tony Allen has since died since this LP came out just a couple of years ago. So there you go. That is the trumpet lead choice. What's next? The next question is guitar lead. Again, I didn't want to go for the obvious, which could have been, I don't know, Wes Montgomery or Grant Green or Kenny Burrell. Instead, another 1970s LP, actually, this time by the great Larry Coryell, who's dead, unfortunately deceased. And this is the Restful Mind LP from, again, on the Vanguard label. Vanguard is doing well today, from 1975, which I picked up during lockdown. Just a beautiful LP. There's some classical elements to this too. very dexterous playing, and Ralph Towner's on this LP too. So two, and in answer to this question, two great jazz guitarists for the price of one, in Larry Coryell and Ralph Towner. So beautiful cover too. Cost a few pound. Picked up in a second-hand record store on the Vanguard label. It's a wonderful LP. The cover suggests it's meditative, but it isn't really. There's a real mix of stuff. Some of it's more challenging. Some of it is quiet and as the title suggests, but other parts of it are more upbeat and up tempo. So yeah, guitar lead. I'm selecting The Restful Mind from 1975 on the Vanguard label by Larry Coryell, great guitarist. What is next? So another possibly surprising choice for someone. Again, something that I picked up, I'd say about 4 years ago on a whim, and it's one of the best on a whim purchases I've ever made. Actually, by an American Japanese female pianist, still alive, I think in the late 80s or early 90s, Toshiko Akiyoshi, and it's the Finesse album, which I believe is from 1978, sorry, on the Concord label. This is a wonderful jazz LP. It's an LP that you could play at a dinner party for people who don't like jazz at all, but at the same time, it's not background music. And if you're just alone and want to listen to a great jazz LP, great piano-led jazz album, it only features piano, bass, and drums. Absolutely tremendous trio on this, and her playing is just beautiful. So this, again, you can just tell from the cover it's worth taking a risk on. It was about £7, so what's that? $10-11. Probably quite readily available. It's not on any streaming services. This, the album Finesse on the Concord label. Like a lot of jazz stuff, it's really well pressed. It sounds almost like an audiophile recording. But as I say, her piano lead on this, it's a mixture of covers and her own compositions. It's just wonderful, and it's one of the best piano lead LPs in my collection. To be honest, hence the choice. So sticking with keyboards then, organ lead. Again, some things I could have selected instead of this. Some great jazz organ players. I could have selected Jimmy Smith, for example. Very tempting given some of the recent Blue Note reissues, but I've gone for this this late 60s album by Reuben Wilson that was released late last year on the Blue Note Classic Vinyl series, and it's called Love Bug. Wonderful cover, that, isn't it? But this is a great LP. It's very melodic and bordering on commercial. You've got George Coleman on sax, Grant Green on guitar, and then the great Lee Morgan on trumpet on this LP. Lee Morgan is pretty subdued on this, actually. He just goes with a melody. There's some soloing, but which kind of this album isn't really about lengthy jazz solos. It's more melodic, more commercial, definitely in its outlook. It's from 1969, but nevertheless not a shallow LP. It took a couple of plays to get into it. I think because Lee Morgan was on it, I was expecting something that was going to really push the envelope. But nevertheless, a wonderful jazz organ LP. Most of the compositions, if not all of them, are by Reuben Wilson, I think, on who's obviously the lead on organ. But a really worthwhile classic series jazz LP. Obviously, again, remastered by Kevin Gray, so the sound is absolutely impeccable, and this is a really good pressing. I think done at Optimal, or was it Coherent? No, it's a Coherent Audio, and obviously mastered by Kevin Gray. So that is the organ choice. Now, this is the only category I struggled with, was the next one out of the 22. As it stands, I don't own any lead jazz LPs that feature the lead instrument is trombone or tuba. I should probably get a solo LP by the sideman that I feature in this choice. So I don't have it, despite the size of my jazz collection. I didn't have a lead that featured a trombone or a tuba. So instead, I've chosen The All-Seeing Eye by Wayne Shorter, which features Gretchen Monka III on trombone backing him. So because Gretchen Monka III is pretty prominent on this 7-piece Wayne Shorter band LP, The All-Seeing Eye, I've cheated a bit. This is the only question I've cheated on because I didn't own any albums by a trombone or tuba player, but I do really want to get my hands on Evolution by Gretchen Monka III. His Blue Note LP as a lead. I don't think it's out on any of the Blue Note 80 series, that Gretchen Monka III LP, but this Tone Poet featuring Gretchen Monka III by Wayne Shorter will do nicely for now. This is a challenging LP. It's not easy listening, pushes the envelope, but you know, like all great jazz LPs, it takes a few listens to get into, and once you do, you're there. The final track, which is actually written by Alan Shorter, Wayne Shorter's brother, is the peak for me. I can't pronounce it. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, but that is a really tremendous coda to this album. There's a section on it where Wayne Shorter just steps away from the mic and continues playing, and it's absolutely tremendous. So you know, it's not the easiest LP to get into, but it's worthwhile persevering with The All-Seeing Eye and this wonderful Tone Poet pressing. So trombone or tuba, don't have one, but Gretchen Monka III does play trombone. He's all over this this Tone Poet Reissue by the lead man Wayne Shorter. So what is next? A jazz funk LP. I thought about going right down the funk route here with something like, I don't know, Earth, Wind and Fire or Kool and the Gang, but I thought that's cheating a bit. Let's stay more on the jazz end of funk rather than the funk end of jazz rather than going to the jazz end of funk. So for that reason, not a very well known LP actually. I don't know why. But this 1979 LP on Elektra Records by Donald Byrd and 125th Street New York band is absolutely fantastic. Again, on the commercial end of the spectrum, but Donald Byrd on trumpet, just a massive production with a full band sound, some vocals on here from memory as well, but it's absolutely amazing. It's got a P-Funk vibe to it, but I would say it's closer, a little bit closer to jazz than funk, but you know, it's not about solos, it's not about dexterity, it's about the tune really. Look at that cover. I think it must be by the same artist that did I Want You by Marvin Gaye. It's like kind of got a jazz club with loads of black musicians playing in it. Just a wonderful cover. Yeah, this is what's great about vinyl, isn't it? This is just a tremendous cover, and the sound is absolutely huge on record. So this must be available on Discogs fairly reasonably because I got it for a few pounds second hand, obviously an original or early pressing, strawberry pressing. Actually, it sounds absolutely tremendous. So it's the self-titled 1979 LP by Donald Byrd's 125th Street NYC band, and it is my choice for jazz funk album within the questions. So jazz fusion then. Again, you know, and unsurprisingly, people have gone for the likes of Weather Report, for example, which I completely understand. I've gone for something from the ACM label, actually. I've just been listening to this LP and it's absolutely beautiful. It's by the Gary Burton Quintet featuring Eberhard Weber, and it's the LP The Ring, or just Ring, from 1974 on ACM. This is an original German pressing. It might even be a first pressing, and it's absolutely wonderful. Gary Burton's a vibes player. Just a wonderful sense of touch. And then you've got two really good guitarists on this. You've got a young Pat Metheny on here, and also another jazz guitarist named Mick Goodrick, who writes one of the tunes, and then of course the great Eberhard Weber, you know, possibly if not the greatest ACM bassist and jazz fusion bassist. Some might argue Jack Pastorius or others, but Eberhard Weber's up there, and there's a version of his classic track, The Colours of Chloe, on here too. There's a 10-minute Carla Bley track, Silent Spring, which is absolutely wonderful, and there's a forum for the drummer on this, Bob Morris, named Intrude, which is just a wonderful drum instrumental track as well. But the whole thing is absolutely fantastic, held together by Gary Burton's vibes. If ECM's a bit ethereal and a bit tricky for you, I'd recommend trying this LP because it's more accessible than a lot of ECM. The Penguin Gate Jazz, which I like that book, but they often make wrong selections, or it's all about opinion, isn't it? But in my opinion, they say that this is not one of Gary Burton's best LPs. I would strongly disagree with that. I think this is a great entry point for both ECM and for Gary Burton's work. So Ring by Gary Burton, featuring Eberhard Weber on the ECM label, as I say, from 1974. And this is a really good jazz fusion LP featuring a very young Pat Metheny on guitar. So really enjoy that album when I pull it out. So what's next then? I think we have an underappreciated jazz LP next, and I thought this is actually an underappreciated jazz label. I'm talking about Black Jazz Records, which was a 1970s US independent jazz label. And that is the logo there, if you can see it, the Black Jazz label. And this is a reissue that came out last year, really good reissue actually, of, I think it's maybe the very first Black Jazz album from 1971, and it's by the label's owner or co-owner, Gene Russell, and it's named New Direction. Really strong. So Gene Russell is the producer on this, and the pianist, and who else is on this? You got Henry Franklin on bass, who's one of the great Black Jazz Records label artists too. So if you want an intro to Black Jazz Records, because I think an early copy of this album would be A, expensive, and B, probably sound terrible. Not very well pressed because they were an independent label and probably couldn't press very well. But so the reissues that have come out in the last year or two of some of the Black Jazz Records are definitely worthwhile, and this is the first one of those. New Direction by Gene Russell. I mean, also on that label, another classic LP was The Skipper by Henry Franklin. Then you had Second Wave, which I've heard by Roland Haynes as well. So definitely worth checking out. And some great compilations of Black Jazz Record stuff too, both on CD and streaming, and probably on vinyl too. But this was the first LP, and it's tremendous, by Gene Russell, and it is named New Direction. So that is the underappreciated jazz album. Live album then. Again, a difficult category because jazz tends to excel in this area, doesn't it? And it's because I guess it's such a of the moment genre, because lots of the greatest jazz LPs were recorded in 1 or 2 takes in the studio over a couple of days. There are so many great live jazz LPs. I didn't want to go for the obvious. I didn't want to go for Miles Davis live at the Plug Nickel, or John Coltrane live at the Village Vanguard. You all know those LPs, or you should if you don't. So, but this one I've selected specifically because I can't understand why its reputation isn't right up there. It's definitely a known jazz LP, but it doesn't get talked about that often. And it's the 1966 album by the Cannonball Adderley Quintet, Mercy, 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 live at the Key Club. Wonderful LP on this this Capital Rainbow label. Beautiful sounding. It's what you want from a jazz live album, which is it sounds like it was recorded in a jazz supper club with everybody enjoying cocktails and feeling great on a Friday night. That's the vibe of this, but that doesn't mean that it's surface level. It's a deep LP, as well as being upbeat and up tempo. So a really great jazz live LP. You can definitely stream this, and I don't think it's that expensive. I think I paid about £15 for this, but it's a really great. It might even be an original or first mono pressing, UK pressing on the Capital Jazz label. But yeah, Cannonball Adderley Quintets, Mercy, 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 live at the club. Just a wonderful vibe to it and a great jazz live album. So what about a Supergroup then? Which is the next question. I'm gonna cheat a bit here because this is more of a kind of most of the Ornette Coleman band who've got together with one or two other musicians, and this is another ACM recording released from 1979. And this is by Old and New Dreams, and this features Don Cherry and Charlie Haddon and Ed Blackwell and Dewey Redman, all of whom recorded or were in Ornette Coleman's band at some point. But I'm going to claim this to be a Supergroup album just because I wanted to feature it. So it's basically the Ornette Coleman band without Ornette Coleman. It's very experimental. They're trying new things, but the weight and the wealth of talent on this LP, particularly Don Cherry, is fantastic on this. And as is the saxophonist Dewey Redman. So highly recommended. Probably not cheap, but it's not ridiculous to get this on vinyl. You may get it for about £20, something like that, on this ACM label. But yeah, really tremendous LP. Old and New Dreams. I don't know how many LPs he's recorded actually, but it wouldn't have been more than a couple. But I think this was the first Old and New Dreams LP by this quartet on the ACM label. So that is the Supergroup choice. Favorite artist as a sideman. So this is easy. I think the chap who does this incredibly well for me, but also released some great solo LPs too, was the great Freddie Hubbard. And this was one of the Blue Note Classic Series LPs released within the last 2 years, and Speak No Evil featuring Freddie Hubbard, to the extent that I would even say that this feels and sounds, to all intents and purposes, like a Freddie Hubbard lead album rather than a Wayne Shorter lead LP. I mean, the whole band's stellar, right? You have Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter on bass, and Elvin Jones. Do I need to talk much about this LP? Because if you're just getting into jazz, this is one of the jazz classics and one of the greatest Blue Note titles. But for anybody else who's a connoisseur or just has a reasonable jazz collection, I'm sure you all know Speak No Evil by Wayne Shorter and how great Freddie Hubbard is as a sideman on this here album. Right now for something different, because the next question is an album more people should know about. And be surprised if many of you out there have heard of this LP, because it's by a street jazz musician from Florida, from Venice Beach, Florida, and he's a saxophonist and played other reed instruments too. It's Billy Harris, and this is the 1980 LP, which is finally released on vinyl in the late 90s, and it's named I Want Some Water. This is an audiophile release actually, which is released on the Nimbus label in the late 90s. I picked it up from a really good UK British audiophile label who tend to specialise in jazz, but not only jazz, named the Vinyl Adventure. So actually, I got this when I ordered another LP from the Vinyl Adventure, which was the debut Counting Crows LP, August and everything after, and they had a deal on Vinyl Adventure before Christmas where they would send you a surprise album in the post with your choice, an audiophile album with your actual purchase, and this is what they sent. And I couldn't be happier with their accidental selection of this Billy Harris LP, because it's just a gorgeous, wonderfully recorded, all analog recording from 1980. I think this was recorded in Florida. But anyway, Billy Harris, I Want Some Water, finally released on vinyl in 1999 on the Nimbus label. And this sounds, if you can track it down, this sounds absolutely tremendous. But you'll have to hunt around for this, I think, from something like an audiophile shop or online emporium is how you'll get hold of this. But yeah, definitely an album you should know about that you probably don't. So what about the next one then? An artist that should have been bigger, and I think that this saxophonist is well known, but died young, probably isn't in that kind of A-list canon when you talk about great saxophonists. I'm talking about Tina Brooks. I'm going to feature the LP Minor Move by this great tenor saxophonist. This is one of my favourite tone poets that came out in the last 2 years. You've got Lee Morgan on trumpet, Sonny Clark on piano, Doug Watkins on bass, and Art Blakey on drums. And I think even at the time when this came out, when did this originally come out? In fact, it might not even. Yeah, it was recorded in 1958, but I don't think it came out until 1980. It just sat in the Blue Note vault, I guess, for all of that time, and then eventually the second reissue came out 2 years ago on the Tone Poet label via this reissue. But generally speaking, he's an underrated, underappreciated saxophonist. I wish that within the classic series they'd reissue his LP True Blue. It might have come out with the 75th series, but that should have been. Hopefully they will bring that LP out later this year or next year, because True Blue by Tina Brooks, I think, was his signature work. But in the absence of that, this Tone Poet will do very nicely indeed, and that is Minor Move. Right, what's next then? Let's have a look. The next question is a vocal jazz LP. A vocal jazz LP. And again, I didn't want to go for the most obvious of choices on this, so I've gone for something a little bit different when I eventually find it. Sorry about this. And it is Julie London. Sings the songs of Cole Porter, and it features the Bud Shank Quintet, and this is All Through the Night. So Julie London, American vocalist, I suppose sub jazz, but just the depth of her voice and how great this Bud Shank Quintet are. This is a mono recording I picked up. It just sounds wonderful. So something different. Would have been easy to pick a Sonora, Ella Fitzgerald, or vocalists of that idiom, but I've gone for Julie London. You could say this is more easy listing, but not with Bud Shank's quintet backing her. So this is an absolutely tremendous jazz LP from 1965 actually, on the the Black Liberty label, and it's a mono original or early pressing. Sounds absolutely wonderful on record. So Julie London is my jazz vocalist choice. So just a couple more things to say then. Records I would hope to find in 2022. Have I missed something out? Album not many people talk about. I may have missed one out. Here we go. An album not many people talk about. So, this one by the Jimmy Owens and Kenny Barron Quintet. You had better listen. This is a wonderful label actually. The kind of green and turquoise Atlantic label, and it's from 1967. Just a great melodic bebop jazz LP. So Jimmy Owens on sax and Kenny Barron on trumpet. Have I got that the right way around? Let me just check. Anyway, probably the wrong way around, but this is a tremendous melodic LP. Very much redolent of Blue Note, actually, the kind of, really commercial lead-off track, and then they go off on a bit of a tangent. But yeah, fantastic LP. The Jimmy Owens and Kenny Barron Quintet, you'd better listen, is my album that not many people talk about. So last couple of categories then. New releases I'm looking forward to. So anything that comes out this year by Comet is Coming, I'm looking forward to. What does Shubaga Hutchins do next? That contemporary series that's coming out via Craft and Acoustic Sounds looks really exciting. So I think a mix of new stuff in that British jazz scene, and then some reissues via that contemporary scene, and also what happens in Tone Poet as well. I'm really looking forward to. So the very last one then, if my house was on fire, what LP would I grab? Which jazz LP would I take? and grab as the house went up in flames. And because of its scarcity, but also because of how much I love it, and because it's limited to 1,999 copies globally and signed by the artist, it would have to be the audiophile signature edition of Ron Carter's Foresight live in Stockholm LP, which came out 2 years ago. Wonderful, wonderful double jazz LP from Ron Carter, featuring, honestly, Rennie Rosnes on piano on this is absolutely tremendous. Is a jazz pianist. Then you've got Jimmy Green on sax, Peyton Crossley on drums, and obviously the great Ron Carter on bass. So this LP, very difficult to get hold of. It's a wonderful, stretching but also melodic jazz LP. And Ron Carter as a band lead on this. Lots of his compositions on this too was absolutely tremendous. So because of how much of I love it and how scarce it is, I would have to go with Foresight live in Stockholm by Ron Carter. So there you have it. That is my vinyl jazz tag 2022. Hope you enjoyed it and take a lot from it. It's probably longer video than I expected it to be, but hey ho, 22 questions is a lot, and there's some depth there obviously to get into. So you have it. Look forward to seeing some more of these jazz vinyl tag videos. Please like, subscribe, comment. Love to hear what you think of any of the selections there. And there's a big variety obviously. So until next time, take care. Bye.